With you, I was just telling Maddie that I came from, we were in Orlando visiting the Campus Outreach Indianapolis summer project, we call it the OP. And then we went over to Daytona with Campus Outreach Augusta for their beach project, leadership project, and then coming out here with you guys. So we're making our rounds with the CEO summer projects. But this is a treat, and I just want you to know this is a treat that the Lord has kind of slid into your summer. You're gonna say the same thing after this evening. But we get to not only learn more about the history of the Navigators, we get to learn more about Jim Downing, and really we're going to learn the history of Campus Outreach. Now we're going to come back to this slide because we want Jim to tell us about where this took place and a little bit about this. And I'll tell you more about Jim. But I do want to share one verse with you. Hebrews 13:7 says, "Remember those who led you, who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their life and imitate their faith." And in this first session, Brett's asked me to team up with Jim Downing, and in this first session, we're going to talk about the history of a movement called the Navigators that really was you might say, one of the major spiritual mentoring movements for the history of Campus Outreach. We feel like we often say that we know that the local church is our mother, but we say that we think the Navigators were our father. You might say, well, we can take the other way, the local church is our father, and Navigators are our mother. And so we've learned so much from these men and women. And so Jim Down is going to share with us about a few things. One, we're going to look at this idea of remembering those who led you. So we're going to talk about the history, his history. This is living history, almost 103 years old. And this was, I think this is, he said, the third meeting of the day for him. And he said, I'm a little overdressed because the first meeting, everybody was in coat and ties. He said, I would have been a little more casual. So you're going strong. If y'all have ever read about Caleb, said that Caleb at 120 years of age says his eye was not dim or his strength was not abated. And that's Jim Downing. He's just getting started. I want you to know at 103 yet, Jim? When would be 103? August. Yeah, August. He said, I think I was with you, Mike, on my 80th birthday, which he was. And he was with us, we figured, right before his 98th birthday in Asheville, North Carolina. So this is a great reunion for a dear friend. So we're going to talk about history and his history and the history of the Navigators. But then it says, and remember those who spoke the word of God to you. So we're not just going to talk about the movement of the Navigators, but we're going to talk about some core commitments that were put in place in those early days and how those values or commitments continue to shape this worldwide movement of thousands of people that have been won to Christ, discipled, and trained how to do that, and really seeing the gospel spread all around the world. And then we're going to talk about that legacy. It says, also consider the outcome of their faith. And this is a very rich legacy. And I think you're going to begin to hear, then we're going to have dinner and do some other things. When we come back tonight, you're going to hear that the legacy of the Navigators is actually your legacy, and how this story is your story, and how God was going before you so that somebody might bring the gospel to your campus and share Christ with you. So Jim, I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself as I ask you questions, and we're going to get to know one another. So come on up and join me up here. And let me introduce Brett Clark. He's Jim's assistant, works with him, alongside him, as Jim continues to have a national and really international ministry of impact for Christ.
Now, I asked you to do this because I knew who I helped and training. And I like you two girls right here when you come up. You take my hand on this hand, you take my hand
But what an introduction right there. Okay.
Well, I got to warn folks, I'm kind of fragile, so take it easy.
Be careful how they grab you. You might fall apart.
Is it true you're always willing to lend a hand?
Lend a hand, I've got one on my shoulder.
Always done that.
Okay. Now that I got my arm back, I can move. You remain close if I need.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Well, let me start by saying it's so great to see you and how much I love you and how important you are in my life. You're such a dear friend and mentor.
If I remember, you were 35 when I was your first, and you were the oldest boy in campus outreach.
I was the senior campus outreach guy at 35, and if he said he remembers that I was 35, I want you to know that's how old I was. And I know his mind is a lot sharper than mine. Well, through the years, you've been such a blessing to me. And when Brett told me that their vision was to bring the students out here to hear the story of the navigators and wanted me to come and be a part of it, think that we could be together for another time was just such a great joy and blessing. So again, thank you for loving me. Thank you for being my mentor and friend and my model. I really love you. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you. I just certainly don't see you that often.
I need more invitations, but I also need to come out here more regularly.
Yeah.
My microphone, I had too much feedback with his. I wonder if you can feel yours. If we can just hear you through.
Probably hear me through. How do we try? How do we try? Did you kill it?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So possibly you can just hear me through his microphone. Is that better?
At age nearly 103, I can't hear, I can't see, I can't walk, but I have more fun than everybody else.
Well, we know that
Slide this in this pocket just to maybe get it away from that other receiver.
we know we're going to tell some stories, so eventually they're going to know a little bit about the occupational hazard that would have some impact on your hearing. But I have some other pictures. We are going to go back to that picture, but I have another picture, several pictures here. Jim was it the West Virginian? Jim was on a battleship in Pearl Harbor when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And I'm going to let him tell you about that. Are you the only living member of the military, or there's still some that was there that day at Pearl Harbor?
There's still some. I'm going to San Diego next week to meet a couple of them.
Okay. So just a few.
Brett, you want to get that book forward?
Yeah.
For 4 years, I was billed as the oldest surviving member of Pearl Harbor attack. But another guy who's a year or older than I am, so I'm going to see him in San Diego. He's 104.
Well, we're going to talk about how your life intersected with Dawson Trotman, but I think I want to start right there. Were you asleep? Were you on the deck? What was happening when you were alerted that there were bombs filling the city?
There were about 70,000 military people on Oahu. And there's so many that hotels could accommodate them. So they weren't allowed to stay overnight unless they're married. So I'd been married just 5 months. So I was at the navigator home when the first bombs were dropped. But got down to the scene within 20 minutes on my ship. And that picture is my ship after it was sinking there.
That's the West Virginia. Now, you told me that you were not only pulling bodies off, but that you had a Bible study in bomb shelters. Tell us about that. I imagine that you had a captive audience.
Yes, well, with the number of ships sunk and the people without a home, why, actually the night after the attack, they just opened sports arena at Pearl Harbor. So we thought the bed sheet to get ready to sleep, so we got a mattress and pillows and went over. And it was called the Walk Arena, but we renamed it the Mosquito Bowl because all the fetus came in to feast there that night. But there's all these homeless people, so to speak, there. So the only place it was dark after night was the air raid shelter. So we started Bible studies in the air raid shelter every night for 3 months.
Every night for 3 months in the air raid shelter. Was there still fear that the Japanese were going to come back and bomb again? What was the whole environmental emotions at the time?
Well, it's hard for this generation to realize a world without satellites or radar. But in 1941, all you knew that's happening is what you could see. So we had no way of knowing where the Japanese were. And we did expect another attack that night. Actually, the Japanese task force only had enough fuel to turn around and get back, so we weren't going to hear of that. But we didn't know that.
Had no idea that they weren't going to come back and bomb again.
We expected it to come that night.
Yes. So, did a lot of Navy men commit their life to Christ in those bomb shelters?
Yes. I kept in touch with quite a few of them in that. And then later on, I had Bible studies other places. But I could give you the names of Bangalore, but some people are pretty well known and came out of Christ through those Sundays.
Now, you mentioned that you were already connected to the navigators in Pearl Harbor. Tell them about Dawson Trotman's vision, how he met Navy men, and then later let's talk about how you met him. So let's just back up a little bit on this idea of how did the navigators begin, how did Dawson begin to work with the military men?
Yes. He came to Christ through scripture memory as a non-Christian. The church where his girlfriend dragged him off to church. And they were having a contest between the Reds and Blues or whatever it was. And the one that memorized the most verses had to imitate the others of a winter roast or something like that. So the next week, he was the only one that memorized all of them. So he got his impression of the church kids at that point. So after memorizing John 5:24, that's when he came to Christ. Now, he was a chosen person. The host, as the writer said, when God gets ready to bless the church and the world, he first picks out a man and model that principle. So he figured out early in his life the input he needed to give the output that he needed. So he designed diagrams, began to, memories were important to him because that's where he came to Christ. So he began to try to influence other people. So he had a little crowd of people around him, his own age. But I've heard this statement that discipline without desire is drudgery. So he laid the same disciplines on them, as he did himself, and they all got that load. So he took a couple years at Bible Institute, Los Angeles. Another girl named Helen Rittenhouse. She lived in San Diego and used to invite the sailors for new training over for dinner. So when one of them, named Mr. Spencer, was going to move up to Long Beach to join the fleet, she said, "You look up, Dawson, you'll help you grow." So they got together, and Buster went out to his house. He was a Navy man for chicken dinner, and then that night, on the way back to the ship, they pulled up in the Palo Verde Skills. just for the fellowship. And they didn't know that they parked in Lover's Lane. So this was in the days of Prohibition. And whenever you saw a couple guys park their car, they come in and follow. So they were parked close to the schoolhouse. And the policeman would guard the schoolhouse. So he saw them over there, come over and said, "Okay, guys, where's the bottle?" And not that he wanted to enforce the law, he just wanted to drink. Most of the days when I read about the gangster in Chicago that left a wife and 7 policemen to support. But Dawson said, "We have a Bible." And he said, "You've got the keys to the schoolhouse, open up, I'll show you." So he took him through the plan of salvation. And the policeman didn't make any commitment that night. But every objection he brought up, Dawson Cotton just turned to the Bible with the answer. And in Romans 3, the Bible is called God's great mouth stopper.
You were one of the early disciples, didn't you?
Yes, well, then Spencer and another sailor, and the same thing. He came to the Navy to save money. There was no GI Bill in those days, our college loan program. So he joined the Navy to save money to go to college and seminary. But his vision had slipped a little bit. So Buster Spencer began to teach him. Well, I think this is important. I worked this one thought in that. So Spencer took him over. His name was Bernie Harris, to meet Dawson Trotman. And he said, "Now here's a man that needs what you gave me even more than I did." And Dawson Trotman almost did. But he said, "What's wrong with you teaching?" And Spencer said, "I can never do that." So Dawson said, "If you can't teach him what I taught you, I'm a failure as a teacher. I'm going to start all over again with you." Now, these two met 2 more. And then there was a 5th guy came in, and
That was you. You were the 5th guy.
I was 6th.
You were the 6th. I knew it was coming. All right.
And I knew all 4 of them, all 5 of these guys.
Y'all were all in San Diego at the time?
All on the same ship, the West Virginia.
On the West Virginia?
If you have an NIV concordance, one of those 6 was at Goodrich. Because it came out, you see the NIV concordance, you put that together, he became a Greek Hebrew scholar. Another guy became a missionary to Africa, another to China. And Ed became a Greek and Hebrew teacher. So these men all made their mark, all 6 of them, all 5 of them. I'm the only one that made it further up to me. So that's how the group grew. And I was number 6 in that first group there. But
Tell us this. When did Dawes start talking about multiplication as a strategy for reaching others? It sounded like it was kind of early on, but how did he begin to put more emphasis on that than just teaching or evangelism? How did that start growing?
well, I think that was kind of born in him because early in his messages, and he's a little message on that, I'll take through. When a couple gets married, if they don't have children, it's either because they're immature or they're sick, because that's natural. So he felt the world could only be populated by reproduction, the same as it had been populated by the human race. So that was inherent in him from the very beginning. When he first discovered the Great Commission, he said, it can be accomplished, or God wouldn't have said, "Go preach to the world."
So we're going to skip ahead a little bit. The ministry began to grow in the military, but you stayed in the military. You weren't a vocational staff member with the Navigators. But how did Dawes spread the leadership as these men began to spread? How did he stay in touch with them? How did you stay in touch with the movement because you left, I know eventually you got to the Pentagon, but after Pearl Harbor, where else did you go? Where were you stationed before you got to the Pentagon?
I stayed in the Pacific for a trip to it, let's see, about 2.5 years. While my ship was salvaged, I was signed up for a lot of money, so they wouldn't let me go until we raised the boat and found out it was missing. But Nelson Drummond's first view of the Navy was it furnished candidates for missionaries. He didn't see it as a ministry. So when he began to see this ministry, he wanted an inside man. So he asked me to be the inside man. So that's the reason I made a career on the Navy as a representative of navigators where it was.
And the Navy would move these men all over the world, and it's almost like sending out new missionaries, I guess. Y'all would train them up, and then the Navy would change their assignment, I guess.
And then after the war, the GI Bill came in, and any ex-serviceman could enroll in any university in the world. So our guys enrolled in universities in France, Germany, and the Far East. So that was just a natural for them to start a ministry. They were in university.
And was that the birth of the College of Ministry of the Navigators? These men coming back from the GI Bill, or had there been something earlier than that?
Wherever they went, the Navy guys that were navigators, they sought out fellowship with the missionaries. And this may sound a little bit immodest, but the missionaries noticed that these guys always carried a little black notebook with their prayer list and stuff. So they began to write Dawson Traum and said, would you send us some of those little books that these guys have? And so Dawson told him it wasn't a book. So our guys were teaching missionaries how to live a life and do evangelism. So that's where our overseas ministry got started. Through some of our guys that went as missionaries, but mainly helping the missionaries.
Now, when Dawson was very young, I would say he was young, 50 years old, he was speaking at a retreat, correct? And there was probably, how many full-time navigators at that time before he died? Maybe staff, and how many were like key men? What was the size of the movement at that time?
I would guess that it was less than 1,000.
Less than 1,000. And then the guys that were on navigator staff was just a handful, or maybe 40 or 50? So
I remember when we sent our first full-time man to the campus, I gave his orientation. I said, I think I'll probably live long enough to see 35 or 40 guys like you.
was that Leroy?
Walt Hendricks.
Walt Hendricks. Yeah. So tell them about what happened to Dawes, and subsequently I want to ask you questions about how that changed your trajectory, your career. But he was speaking at a conference, right?
Yes. And it was Screw Lake, New York, of northern New York State, had a conference ground called the Word of Life. And Jack Wurtson, who ran the ministry up there, had a speedboat. So he asked Dawson to take a ride down on the lake. Well, there were a bunch of comfreys hanging around with the boat. And Dawson was always the kind of person that tried to help everybody else. And he said, let's fill the boat up. So it was 5 passengers. So 8 of them got in. And wanted room to sit down, so Dawson took 2 girls to get them to swim and sit up on the arm of the back seat. And they locked arms in case they get into rough weather. So they were speeding out on the lake. And Jack Wurtson, who was the wheel, turned around to Dawson and said, isn't this fun? Let's go get on them. So Dawson nodded yes. So without looking at the board, Jack threw off full rudder at high speed. And the boat hit a wave, and Dawson and the girl, who was holding from over. He knew she couldn't swim, that's what he needed his arm locked. So he got up, tread water, held her up, brought circled around, and when we strove to pick her up, well, his arm was slipped, and he died holding her up. So Time magazine had his picture next week, and it said, always holding someone up. Now, he was age 50 then, and I was there at Street Lake that week, and never referred to it as a tragedy. And when Billy Graham heard about it, he said, you know, I think they had a conference in heaven last night and decided it was time to bring Dawson home. But it couldn't be ordinary. It had to be fitting with his life. So the caption in Time magazine said, always holding someone up underneath. Now, I never thought it was a tragedy because I knew Dawson Graham that well. He visited me for a conference in 1953 in Hawaii, and we talked about his future. And he said, I've been wine and dined around the world, had tea with the Queen, slumming the Governor's mansions with the Graham team, and all I want to do is give my life to about 60 people, of which you're one, just to check up on you, see if you're doing what I taught you. So that's kind of his vision. But he said, I've made my contribution, and I'm the bottleneck in navigators. The navigators can't grow as long as I'm ahead of it, which is exactly right. Because you couldn't even put a doorknob on the door without his approval. You can imagine how much was stacked up there. So after the war took him home, Gordon Senney was the executive officer, and his philosophy was to exploit the strengths of strong men. So the navigators got back to a vertical curve after that. So that's what navigators grew was after Dawson went on the way.
Now, a lot of the men thought you should take over, and Dawes had let it be known that he thought that Warren should take over. But there was that groundswell where you were the visible leader in the movement. But I think what you did and how you addressed that dilemma really is a lesson for us. So I know I'm asking you to speak about yourself, but tell them what you decided. You didn't stay there at the Pentagon. You were teaching at the War College, right? You didn't stay there, but tell them how you wrestled through that decision.
Well, Gordon Senney was the vice president, came up to Smith Lake on Wednesday after he was drilled. And he and I took a 6-hour drive back from Smith Lake to New York City. And he said, I've always known that I could eventually take over this ministry, but I've already decided it'll be a team ministry, not a one-man ministry. And he said, God has given me the names of you go on a team, and you're one. I want you to get out and make the screws again and come down, which I did. So very often in those first 4 years, I had people tell me, that you should be the president of navigators, not Gordon Senney. So my answer was, the board of directors did not choose Gordon Senney to be the president. God chose him. God didn't choose me. Although he stayed with the Graham team for another 3 years. I had some influence in those days, but it was so clear that Warren Senney was his choice, it never bothered me.
Well, and you worked together to do what one of you couldn't have done. I think that you told me before, others told me that, and you talked about trajectories, that it wasn't too many years later when the Navigators had 6,000 staff worldwide, and you had 50 full-time staff, and just in a very short period of time, they had over 6,000. So I'm sure it took more than just the two of you. It did take a team to see. I guess at that time, it was just the Lord's hand was on blessing you. I guess that's the way multiplication grows, doesn't it? Just exploded on the movement.
Yes, as soon as I said again that Warren knew how to exploit the strengths of strong men. As long as Dawson Cotton was there, it was a one-man operation. And we didn't have department heads. He was the department head of everything.
Now, we're going to shift and we're going to talk about values. But before we do that, there's a piece that I think everybody here needs to know. How did we get to Glenn, and did y'all all think Dawes was crazy when he said that he thought the Lord was leading him to do that? And just let them know a little bit about how they came across this beautiful piece of property and why he believed the Lord wanted y'all to have that property.
Yes, well, Warren Sandy was the director of First Dawson, from the Graham team.
And when he says that, Billy Graham had Dawson Trotman and the Navigators assigned to do all the follow-up from all their evangelistic crusades around the world, correct?
And counselor training and
So you
evangelism.
did the advanced training of all, to train people how to do evangelism, how to do follow-up, and then Graham would come in town, preach to thousands, hundreds would commit their life to Christ, and the teams would stay and follow them up and try to get them connected to local churches. So when he says the Graham team, he's referring to the fact that Dawes and the Navigators were, at that time, a key part of the Billy Graham Association.
Yes, Dawson was in charge of the counselor training. Now, in evangelism, before Billy Graham, the evangelists came to town, preached. And if it's a high-powered crusade, they had a song leader. And real high-power, they might have a soloist. But from the beginning, Billy Graham, he studied the lives of all evangelists of brother to find out what their weak spots were. And one of the weak points was there was no follow-up. So from the very beginning, he said that wasn't going to be a weak spot in his ministry. So he persuaded Dawson to take that position as the counselor training and follow-up. What was I supposed to add?
So I want to hear, how did we end up with Glenn?
Now, well, Billy Graham was looking for a place for what he called oven hours. And he asked various people about a spot. Well, a realtor here in town, Russell said, this property is coming on the market. That'll make an ideal place. So Dawson Trotman and Billy made an agreement that the Navigators would occupy this place and maintain it. But we would leave the castle, the pink house, and the other gifts for Billy. So that was the arrangement then. Well, we've got copies of it. Billy put out a film raising money for Glenn. His advisor said, you get money to preach the gospel. If you start buying real estate, the money's going to cut off. So what he said then, Billy said later, I felt that God intended Navigators to have this place all along. He's used me as an agent. So this place was owned by Catholic layman, pretty high up in the hierarchy. And when they found out that Billy wasn't going to take it, they did everything they could to avoid the contract. But the contract read Billy Graham and or associates. So legally, since Dawson Trotman was an associate, the option was legal. So that's the way the Navigators did it.
So what did the Navigators pay to acquire, how many acres is this, and what did they pay to acquire this property?
There's 550 acres here, and George Strait is the man who owned it. And at that time, the capital gains tax was 92%. So the market price was $340, $40,000,
$340,000.
furnished.
Furnished.
And during the closing, Billy Brown's business manager did the business. George Trigg asked him one morning, he said, "Do you believe in Santa Claus?" And so George Wilson, who was the business manager, said, "Well, now his name is George Trigg." So Trigg said, "I've got 240 acres up the canyon, and I'm gonna throw it in for."
550 just threw the 240 in?
So we've got the people that came.
So y'all saw the camp going?
And we've got a branch down here, well, we've got a branch in several cities, but that's the name we came. So, when we were building a new building, maybe 25 years ago, I asked builders, "What is this place worth today?" He said, "I know a realtor that would give you 25 million.
That was 25 years ago? Yeah. So we can
So
imagine.
we paid 340,000.
Now, you lived on this property. Tell them a little bit about the pink house and the carriage house and the castle and who lived where and just a little bit of the history on that.
Yeah, well, the castle is, how many rooms?
67. 67.
Yeah, he gives it to us all. But, Palmer, General Palmer, the owner, was a general in the Civil War. And after he got out of the Army after the Civil War, he studied railroading in England. So his birth was to North-South Railroad from Mexico City to Denver. And he needed some business for it. So he established a city called Ocean Springs. So he's looking for a place to build his home. And they blocked this problem, so Eagle's Nest. Well, in the Scottish, Eyrie is nest, and Glen is valley. So they said, let's call it Valley of the Eagle's Nest. So Glen Eyrie is short for Valley of the Eagle's Nest. So the pig house was built, the castle was built over about 26 years.
When was it finished? When was the castle finished? 1900s?
1903, I think.
And this was the carriage house.
This is
that
here.
we're in. And the rest of it was the stables for the horses. Well, you can still see the horses placed in there. Then there were various guest houses around, and he had his own dairy, his own ice making machine. And so it was a pretty elaborate estate. But the Navigators got it for 340.
And so did you live in the pink house or did Lauren live in the pink house?
Well, when I moved out here, we didn't want our children separated from the Republic. So any families with children didn't live on Glen Eyrie, just a single people.
Okay. Now, I want to shift because on our little outline, I want to talk about values. And you want to try something? We're going to talk about values, and I want you to talk about multiplication. And I want you to talk about how movements go, the whole, it's actually the monument. It goes from man, movement, machine to monument. I hope I got that right. And then I know you like to talk about golfer's life cycle. Because I want you to talk a little bit about multiplication, what you learned about ministries and movements and how they stay focused on their core values. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Okay, well, movements do start with a man that has a vision. And the economists best know how to describe a movement. They say that a movement is of people who carry out the objectives of the man without being subject to or part of it. And that's the way communism is spread, you know. When the communists numbered the millions, there were only a few 100,000 card-carrying communists carried on by, and they call that fellow travelers. So a movement is carried on by fellow travelers who are not a part of or subject to the man organization. Now, there's only been one movement in history that has survived 2,000 years, and that's the Roman Catholic Church. And we can all learn some good things from their organization and imitate it. But they all seem to move from movement to machine. And there's a major denomination in the U.S. that's pretty well spread out. So somebody told me once, if the Holy Spirit was taken out of the world, they wouldn't miss a stroke. They're so well organized, you know.
They can run their program no matter what.
So that's what happened. And people who observe the navigators think that we're beginning to move in the machine stage here. And then I make jokes about the navigators, about the hazards. And I say, we should build another building up here, which will be a museum with the archives. And then the statues of all the guys that started the navigators like that used to be. And I hope that doesn't happen. But machine and the monument in there.
Yeah, so you talk about life cycles and just the life cycle, and you like to talk about Golfer's life cycle.
Death begins when growth ceases. 2 Peter 3:18 said, but grow in grace and in the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So you can locate yourself on that. Where on there? Now, actually, the struggle for survival should be much less in there.
Down here,
Yeah, it should be way down there.
Yep.
And the growth state's the main
we
thing.
don't have this bigger.
I learned this from a stockbroker. He used to tell me, we look for stocks in the growth stage, and then we sell when they peak out. And I said, well, there's a better illustration of that than the stock market. That's a movement. So when you start growing, you start dying. So most movements cut across.
This way,
Plateau over here on the left side someplace. Even down there now.
like you said, they just stop here.
Yeah.
They
So
stop
I tried to locate the navigators. Where are we going to peak out? Are we going to cut across? So I know some of the dangers that happens. And I've heard campus outreach described as the navigators without baggage. And as people get older, we pick up more baggage all along. So the Roman Catholic Church is the only movement in history that hasn't cut across. The YMCA, you just name them, all of them cut across. And there's reasons that should be foreseen and cut off. But I'm not active on the board now, but I keep a coach when I see a danger point. That you begin to leave the growth stage and start cutting across.
I got two more things I want you to talk about. Talk to them about what you learned from studying the Jesuits and how that's instructive for us as we're trying to build leaders who will labor for a lifetime.
Yeah, the Jesuits, in the Catholic Church, they're the strongest order. And the most effective missionaries in China were Jesuits. Taiwan has been a fertile ground for missionaries for years. Protestants, Catholics moved in and built the finest university in Taiwan. And within a few generations, half the people in Taiwan were Catholics. So the Jesuits thing is education. You know, most of the major universities are named Jesuit in the U.S. various cities.
Georgetown, Notre Dame.
Just a side issue, that the Jesuits send their best priests to the military academies because at 4 o'clock, the Protestant chaplain goes home to be with his family. At 4 o'clock, the Jesuit priest starts meeting with the cadets. So our director back at the Naval Academy, I didn't say once they've had a Jesuit priest come there as a chaplain, and he converted 1,500 unsaved Protestants to unsaved Catholics in 1 year. So I'm not advocating their product that they come out with, but they have survived ever since the Jesuits are named after Army officer, Loyola. He was in the French and Spanish War, was wounded while he was recovering in his uncle's estate, Loyola. He supposedly came to Christ. So they go back. And 50 biographers and read about him. And
Did you talk about how they trained Jesuits and how his training was so powerful? I wanted to hear that.
yeah, one of our leading magazines did an article on the Jesuits, and they said you could take a Jesuit priest, isolate him for 40 years, no contact with any other Jesuits, and you can predict what he'd be doing. The training is so thorough. I don't think that Campus Outreach or the navigation have a training program, but one of the things they do that new recruits is that they have to lie down on the doorstep. So when the senior priests come in, they step on them. And they have to get under the table, contact any other candidates, and you can tell them exactly what you'll be doing. I don't know if Campus Outreach has picked up that once, but the navigators have been called Protestant Jesuits. And Morgan said he asked me one day, why did they call us that? So I went up to Jesuit University in Denver and spent all day with the priest in charge. And that was an interesting experience. So I asked him about his training in there. And it was so impressive that I said, would you come down and speak to our leadership about your training? Well, he was a very interesting person. He said, I'll do anything to advance the kingdom. If I'll advance the kingdom, I'll come down. So I'm not really sharp. I've studied this sometimes past for the paper on it, but I think it'd be a compliment if you get accused of being Protestant Jesuits.
You know, Jim, if the core values that we're talking about here is being a witness for Christ, multiplying his message to the ends of the earth, and then we talk about legacy, you've talked a lot about how does a person keep that motivation, that a love for Christ, how do they keep that heart and you might say that fire burning in their soul? You've seen plenty of people that made these commitments that they're going to be a witness for Christ and they want to change the world, and they run out of gas and they lose that fire. So you've talked a number of different times to us about how do you keep that inner motivation focused on Christ? What do they need to know about God's love? And then also, how do they keep that heart near to Christ?
Yes, that's a great question. And the way I approach it is Satan's greatest weapon is getting us preoccupied with the wrong priority. The world is trying to close in on us from every angle. And when I see a person that the fire begins to go out, I just assume, okay, he's become preoccupied. We had a couple have staff that started buying old houses and fixing them, make a lot of money. So pretty soon, that's what they were doing instead of their nephew ministry. And with younger men and women, it's a wrong relationship. I've counseled lots of young men in my time and find out when they started avoiding me, I always knew that they were in a relationship they wasn't sure I'd approve of it. So. But you and I fight the battle every day of becoming preoccupied, not with what's wrong, but what is, it's wrong because it interferes with the top priority. So that's a short answer to that. Just keep the fire burning. Why? That's got to be the priority. Nothing come in that becomes a priority.
You wrote a little book called Meditation. Some of them may have read it, but you felt like there was something that you feel like this young generation continually struggles because they don't understand truly what it means to be, what justification really means, and how that understanding God's love should transform. I don't know exactly how you say that. You know where I'm going with that? That where you talk a lot about understanding the depths of what justification means and how that can set you free. The love of God can set you free to serve Him out of love and not out of duty. Am I sparking the...
That comes in the second. We need to study to be intelligent Christians. And the great fruit of the Reformation was they rebrought the doctrine of justification. Now, I'm going to keep this to a few sentences, but one of my favorite studies is in 1 John 1, 2, and 3. And remember that John writing to the Christians said, "My little children, I'm writing to you to not commit sin. But if you do," one day when our kids were young, the boys would go out to play, and my wife said, to one of our boys, Joe, "Don't get your feet wet. But if you do, come to the house right away." So when she went out, after we went out, I said, "What kind of advice was that?" "Don't, but if you do." And she gave a good answer. She said, "Well, you know Joe, he'll use every resource at his disposal not to get his feet wet, but he will. He'll come to the house," just like I told him. So what John went on to say is that, "I'm writing to you that you said not, but if you do, we have an advocate, we have a lawyer." So let me take 2 or 3 minutes on this subject, it's not important. But in my teaching, I teach about conversations with Christ. Well, back to if any man sinned, we've got a lawyer. I knew a Baptist preacher once that felt like he needed an office at his home. So he arranged for a contractor to build the office, and he would pay him in increments. But he misunderstood the contractor misestimated the cost, ran out of money. And so he demanded his final payment. And the preacher said, I'll pay you when you finish the room. So the contractor took it to court. So when he was summoned to court, he had a lawyer in his congregation, and he made an appointment with him. So he went to see the lawyer. The lawyer turned on his tape recorder and said, tell me about it. So he told him about it. And then telling it, repeating it, his emotions got high. He walked the floor, his blood pressure was up. What am I going to do? And the lawyer said, I thought you asked me to handle this for you. Did you? He said, yes. You don't do anything. You go home. Forget about it. You never heard about it again. Well, that's what Jesus said. If any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father. We have a lawyer. And the guy who told me this story said, everybody should have a lawyer, just in case somebody accuses you. Well, he said, see my lawyer. So when the devil talks about our past, see my lawyer. I heard this just this last week from a preacher. He said, you know, you can have a short conversation with the devil. When he brings up your past, you bring up his future. I think that's pretty good advice for a short conversation. But justification is too good to be true. Have you ever lost something on your computer? Erased something accidentally? And you can't find it. I did that yesterday. It just thought it never was on there. So justification not only means that God forgives, He forgets, and He declares that it never happened. Never happened in the first place. Too good to be true. So we mix works in with this. I was concerned about a close relative of mine that he was a Christian for a long time, and he backslid away. So he's in heaven now, and I wonder if I'm going to see him. And I remembered that when we receive Christ, He takes care of all of our sin, past, present, and future, before we commit it. It's under the blood. So, probably justification is the most important doctrine for new Christians. I can say more about it, but that's
what I wanted to hear. Now, she may know this, but Jim is actually still on staff with the Navigators campus ministry. He's a campus minister. And I know you worked, at least for many years, with college students. Why do you feel so passionate about ministry to college students? And what would you like to say to this group, kind of as your last word to them? Now, you're going to spend some more time at dinner with the staff, but why are you so passionate about college ministry? And this follow-up is I'm going to let you give your last word and challenge to these college students who are here on the summer project from campuses in Missouri and Ohio, and I guess Illinois as well. So why are you still passionate about college ministry? What's your vision? And then we'll let you give them, your last message to them.
good approach. I want to see everybody that I know totally liberated, totally motivated, and totally fulfilled in life. Now, I've got a formula as to how to attain. If I had to pick between the commanding officer and the chaplain, because both have discovered their gift, they have dedicated their gift, they have developed their gift, and they're about ready to deploy it overseas. And after I finished I spoke at a stand-up mic, the battalion commander came up, put his left arm on my shoulder, pointed his right finger at my nose and said, "I am the most fulfilled person in this battalion, and don't you forget it." So, God wants you to live a life of fulfillment. And to me, that's the formula. Now, I don't mean you shouldn't be on staff of campus outreach with navigators. The fact that you're here is indication that you have a gift. You know, well, the rest of your life, that's it. Just exploit your gift. That's my advice to you. If I see you again, I hope someone will ask you, what is your gift? And what are you doing to exploit it?
Brett, I think you said 4:15, I wanted to land. I feel like I could talk to Jim all day and be reminded of, I will say this, that many of the lessons that you taught me in conversations, those are the lessons that I'm trying to pass on, not only to my own children, but to my staff and to other college students. And your legacy continues, brother. And I know you still, I'm going to let you preach my funeral because I'm sure you're going to outlive me. But I want you to know that God's continued to multiply your life as someone who has dedicated your life to God. And you look forward to your gifts. I do love you. I appreciate you.
Let's give a round of applause.